And hello, welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I am your host, Daren Jaime. We thank you for joining us. Now, if you ask the question, what is the show all about? We bring you a forum that discusses and we provide a deeper understanding of the issues and inequities that so many people face within the community. Things such as inequalities to pressing problems. Our guests provide multiple perspectives and insights, helping us to better understand and address these challenges. So we invite you to stay connected to us as the Social Justice Forum starts right now. And welcome back. Homelessness remains one of the most pressing challenges in New York City, with thousands of individuals and families relying on shelters as they wait for permanent housing. But what if that could be drastically reduced from 2 years to 2 months? Well, we've got somebody who's going to share with us a little bit by transforming the housing system, by streamlining the process for voucher holders, ensuring that they can move from shelters to affordable, stable homes. Joining me now to share more about this impactful work is the CEO and founder of AnthosIHome, Laura Lazarus. And thank you so much for it. Is it Lazarus or Lazarus?
Lazarus.
Lazarus. Thank you so much, Laura. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and when we talk about homelessness, I mean, obviously across New York City, a lot is on the rise.
Yes, there are more than 130,000 people in shelter right now. Of that, 45,000 are children. And my understanding is about 1 in 6 students who are homeless are living in the Bronx right now.
And when we look at the housing situation, the homelessness crisis, obviously your work is doing a lot to combat homelessness and really deal with the issues out there. With boots on the ground, what are you finding?
So we are really focused on helping those who are living in shelter find permanent housing and do that quickly and efficiently with a goal of 2 months. And as you mentioned, right now, it's taking families on average 1 to 2 years. So that's what we're finding is it just can take a really long time to find a unit that works for people and then processing that unit to get that person into a new home.
Yeah.
But there's a real need for this.
Obviously, yeah, a huge need. And when we talk about that need being so prevalent in our community, given the fact that people need homes and at the same time also finding that right space, because we do have a housing crisis. And what are you seeing from your end as far as the housing crisis?
So I just think so many people are suffering because they are not able to find a home. And that's the challenge. But the kind of the crux of what AnthosIHome, what the organization that I founded is about, is that in New York, it's very fortunate for many families, they actually qualify for what's called a housing voucher. Some of your viewers might be familiar with the term Section 8 or rental subsidies, which is an amazing resource. But the problem is that it's very difficult to use it. Nationally, about 50% of these went unused recently. So the idea behind AnthosIHome is to help make it easier for landlords to rent to people with these housing vouchers, and also to help make it easier for the households who are looking for units with these vouchers to utilize them. And that's what we're really there for. So for example, we had a family that we were working with, and they had been looking for a home for 1 year and 8 months. Every time they talked to a landlord and they told them they had a voucher, they heard no, they wouldn't hear back at all. And that's what people are experiencing a lot of, is just nobody will move forward with them. Once we started to work with them, we were able to identify a unit that worked for their family within a couple of months, and we're able to move them in, within 3 to 4 months. And then that meant that they were able to send their kids to pre-K in the local pre-K. The grandmother who was part of that family was able to start dealing with her chronic health conditions, and the mom was able to start looking for work. But they weren't really able to do that when they were in shelter.
When you talk about home solutions or solutions towards housing, I know one of the things that you have is called banking apartments. And talk to us about what banking apartments is and how that's been working for you.
So the idea behind banking is that we have a housing team. We have a team of staff who work very closely with landlords, property managers, and brokers to identify units that will work for these housing vouchers throughout New York City. And we then developed relationships with these landlords where we reserve these units for our future tenants. So people who are living in shelter who need these units, they come to us, they need to find housing, and we ideally can show them a unit within a couple of weeks that meets their requirements. And then once they have been approved by the landlord, and we'll help them with that process also, we then work with them and the landlord to put together the package. There's always a paperwork package as part of these vouchers to process that through the government. And our team, we have an operations team who are experts in these vouchers that helps push that package through the government. And then we help them move in.
And you have this unique partnership with landlords. And I know sometimes landlords always don't end up on the right side, but it seems as though for the work that you're doing, you've been able to really capture a very special relationship with landlords.
We have, I think that, oh, sorry. The idea behind our partnership is that we're trying to make this easier for landlords. We understand that it can be confusing, it can be difficult, and we are really there to hold their hands through the process if they need it and support them. So for example, things can happen along the way that are difficult to resolve with the government agencies. We have relationships within each agency, and so we can help troubleshoot problems that are coming up. Where a landlord might have a lot of difficulty finding the right person to resolve that issue.
Yeah. And going from 2 years to 2 months, really, that's a real lofty goal at the same time, a lofty achievement.
Yeah, we're not at the 2 months yet. We are hoping to get there. I would say we're more at like 3 to 5 months right now. But
Which is
our
still
hope
major, which is still
yes,
major.
still very impactful. And I just want to give you a story about a landlord that we worked with, which kind of elucidates why our services can be so helpful in bringing in new units into this universe. We had a young adult who'd aged out of foster care. She was looking for housing. She identified a unit that worked for her. The landlord actually lived in Florida most of the time, and she only owned 2 units in New York. And she did not have any idea what the voucher program was. So we got on the phone with her. We explained what the program was. And then once she learned about it, which, it does provide guaranteed rent to really support that new tenant. We helped her with the paperwork. We ended up having to send it to her because she was not on the internet, and really walked her through it. And that's the kind of support that we provide. Once the tenant moved in, we provide aftercare for both tenants and landlords for a year. So for example, once this particular tenant moved in, about 5 or 6 months in, one of the government payments she was expecting did not arrive. So we actually have a flexible pool of funding to help make those payments while we sort out what the issue is with the government. So this landlord kind of experienced all of that support all along the way. And in the result was that we had a very happy tenant who was stably housed and, was able to focus on her future life.
And talking about success, I mean, let me mention this here. It says since we received our first referral from the New York City Administration of Children's Services, which is known as ACS, in June of 2023, you've moved in more than 150 families and individuals into permanent housing, and 100% housing retention rate after 12 months. That's major. And I want to tackle that for a minute because I want to talk about that housing retention rate, because that's something that really we see a lot of challenge in. So from your perspective, what's the secret sauce there in that housing retention rate?
So just to note, we're almost at 220 households right now. So I'm thrilled to share that with you. We'll be at 250, we think, in a few weeks. The housing retention rate is really about our ongoing support with tenants once they move into the unit. So we provide a lot of support with them if there are issues. And we use that flexible funding to help make sure that any arrears are addressed. And those arrears could be a tenant emergency. It could be something around the government payment. It could be a concern about utilities. But what that means is when we iron that out early on, it means that the tenant's going to have a much greater chance of success long term. And that's obviously helpful for the landlord as well. So another example is we had a great tenant. She had been looking for a unit for 7 months. She was in college part-time. She was working, super motivated, again, having a lot of trouble finding a unit. We were able to do that for her within a couple of months and move her in a month later. But once she moved in, she realized that her utility costs were really high. We and she tried to get the landlord to investigate. Unfortunately, the landlord would not do that. So we actually sent an electrician out to figure out what was going on, and she was being charged for her neighbor's utilities. Then we were able to get the landlord to fix the problem, which she probably would not have been able to do on her own. And now she only is paying her own utility costs, which of course is much more reasonable. And that again means that she has not accrued arrears, and she's able to have a successful program. She was actually our first tenant, and she has graduated from our program and has renewed her lease and recertified her voucher successfully.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And also, you've also been successful with youth that have been transitioning out of foster care. Understanding about 100 of those
Yes.
have also been able to have that retention as well.
Yes, we're so thrilled that we have been partnering with the Administration for Children's Services, and we have moved more than 100 young adults who are aging out of foster care. Youth who are graduating out of foster care have a high likelihood of becoming homeless. And so our ability to find them housing and support them in that journey. And as you can imagine, a landlord is going to be very skeptical about a young adult who maybe doesn't have a long-term, employment. They might not have finished their education. So with our support, we're really able to kind of help make that matchmaking between them and the landlord possible. We also do a lot of advocating when we are submitting, when a young adult has picked a unit. We do a lot of advocating with the landlord to get them to accept them, to say, look, this young adult is responsible. Here's some reasons why you should agree to move forward with them. And that obviously has worked.
Yeah. And, as I said earlier, having those conversations with landlords, landlords are not always, they're quite skeptical sometimes and really
Yes.
concerned about their property, and rightfully so. But you seem to have gotten a good grip on really being able to have that good relationship with landlords to advance families into a meaningful transition.
Yes, we do a lot around the education of tenants so that they understand what their leases are requiring of them. So a lot of leases have house rules. We will walk through those with the tenant. And I think that then makes them a better tenant, right? They understand what their obligations are. They understand what their financial obligations are and how to plan for that. So that is part of what we do, is really help them with that education. And then once they've moved in, our tenant team will check in with them. We'll actually go visit once a quarter, and we talk to them on the phone or text with them every month just to make sure that everything's going well, and checking in with the landlord as well. There can be a lot of bumps, once you move into an apartment, for anybody. And so we're there to really help them sort that out, especially if it's their first apartment living by themselves.
Yeah. And so moving towards the future, what are your future goals and aspirations? I know you've got some, great success, but I know you're not satisfied yet.
So we really want to address the large homelessness challenges that we have here in New York. And so we are hoping to build on the infrastructure that we built here to really serve more households in need. And our goal is by this summer to have housed a total of 500 households, and then begin to expand on that in future years, so that just we get faster and we are serving more households. And Anthos means blossom. And our goal is to help as many people and families blossom in their permanent homes as possible.
Yeah. What challenges are you really facing right now that maybe the public may not be so aware of? We talked about the success, but of course, with success does come some adversity.
So I think the biggest challenges are just additional funding for us to be able to continue to expand and grow. And also, we're always looking for more partnerships with landlords and brokers and property managers. So we're always, we have a nice pipeline of units, but we're always looking for more partners for that.
Yeah. And so how do people go about doing that?
So we have a website, AnthosIHome.org, and we have a whole section related to landlords where they can sign up, and we can explain the program to them and all the benefits that they would receive in working with us and helping to address this, huge need in New York.
I see you being able to, really knock this out of the park here, and congratulations to you for the great work that you're doing. But when I look at the struggle, I know that in some ways you almost make it look easy, and too easy for some people. But as I look, I say, there's a recipe here. There's something that can be done, and it's really not as hard as people are really projecting. Am I correct?
The process is quite difficult. So I think the whole idea behind Anthos is to simplify it and to provide landlords and tenants with the support. The amount of detail that's required to successfully submit a voucher to a government agency is a lot. And what our team does is, because we do it every day, in and out every day, we really understand the nuances of those applications. That's why we can help put together an application that is easily approved by the government. And that's what we're striving to do,
Yeah.
is to make it easier for people, because it really can be daunting.
Excuse me, I know it can, it really can be. The work that you're doing, though, when I talk about, transitioning out of foster care, that relationship and really being able to make that connection with ACS, and talk about having, ACS as a partner in this. I mean, obviously, they trust you, and you're being able to come through and deliver.
ACS is a wonderful partner. They've embraced this new idea of how you can house people in need, that they have not really been able to provide this service. Their staff are working on a lot of other things at foster care agencies and prevention agencies. And so having a group like us, who is an expert in housing and supporting, making sure that their young adults and their families who are involved in child welfare are able to make sure that they can access these incredibly amazing resources, which are housing vouchers, and make sure that they make their way to an actual apartment, is what makes this partnership really work for us and them.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, as the future is here in, New York City, we look across and we see the numbers are continuing to rise. We see the challenges continue to rise, and therefore, the workload for yourself is going to be, increasing. Talk to me about, the staff and the people that you have working with you, and how you're able as a team to really make this thing happen. And who do you have on staff?
So we have a lot of amazing staff. I'm so proud of them. We have more than 50 people at this point, and we started serving our first client in the summer of 2023. So we have been going through some rapid growth, but I think we just have, the staff are just thrilled to really be coming at this problem in a different way and being part of this incredibly creative idea, which came out of a model that was done in California and has been in operation for more than 10 years with a group called Brilliant Corners. But bringing that to New York to life in this current infrastructure here in New York City is just really exciting to a lot of the staff who work here. So we have people who have experience working with vouchers. We have people with lived experience who are part of our team. We have people who have a lot of experience working with youth who have aged out of foster care. So that's kind of the expertise. And then we have people who are just into the nitty gritty of like putting together a form or processing a furniture request. So we have people who just want to get it done.
Yeah.
And it's great.
I want to ask, a little bit about that, because when you talk about having, a great staff and a well-rounded staff, one of the things that you mentioned was people who've had lived experience. And so I take it there are people who've been through your process and come on back to be able to now serve as an advocate.
Yes, I mean, we have people who might have aged out of foster care or had some experience with homelessness. And I think that just really brings a different lens to their work, right? Because it had affected them in their life. And so it's just all that more meaningful to them. And we're so thrilled to be able to do it as an organization and then support them as well in this work here.
Yeah. Vouchers. I know that we talked about a little bit earlier about the whole voucher process, and I do want to just revisit that for a minute, because you talk about the voucher holders, and you can have a voucher, but the truth is you could be holding on for quite some time. In the life of that voucher holder, can you just share with us a little bit about what they're experiencing? Because I want to highlight, how you're able to make this transition, but really, for the person that's on the other side of this, they're really in some real difficult and sometimes back against the wall circumstances.
Yes. So let's say you're a family residing in shelter. You have been typically you will, if you meet the income requirements with which most shelter residents do because they're very low income, they will be able to receive a city issued voucher or maybe a federal voucher through the New York City Housing Authority or through the housing department. So they will have in hand a voucher. It will have a time limit on it. That time limit can often be extended, but the challenge is that they have to go out and look for units where a landlord is willing to accept their voucher. We find many landlords do not want to work with voucher holders, and they are, you know, if they don't work with voucher holders, that means that they are not abiding by the law, and there are discrimination clauses. But we are trying to kind of approach this on the other side, which is to make it easier for landlords to rent to people with vouchers so that they don't have that experience. But they can be knocking on doors for months and be told no, or they are just ghosted. That's kind of the experience for a voucher holder, is that they have to be out there trying to compete with others to find very limited units. And what we're doing is trying to bring in more units. One of the other issues that voucher holders experience is that many units to be rented to somebody with a voucher, they have to meet inspection requirements that are kind of above and beyond a normal Department of Building requirement. And many units that we look at, like 95%, have some kind of repair need. They're often modest. They can be things like an outlet, or the water temperature is not quite right, or a window lock is missing. They're not high cost items, but if a household from shelter is looking for one of those units and the unit doesn't pass inspection, the landlord won't necessarily make those repairs. But because of our involvement, we're able to get those landlords to make those repairs. And even in some situations, we can help them with those repairs, either getting them done or even helping to pay for them. They're modest, $2,500, $3,500. But getting those done means we're bringing in more units that are available to voucher holders. But without that, a household in shelter might have found a unit that the landlord accepted it, and then it was submitted to the government and it doesn't pass inspection. And then that's the end. And then they have to start all over again. So that's kind of some of the cycle that's happening for people who are living in shelter.
You spoke about being able to assist the landlord to really, get across the inspection finish line. The fact that you could actually help a landlord be able to do that, because sometimes landlords are really, cash strapped, and
Yes.
they want to put somebody in, but money doesn't allow them to do that. So the fact that you're able to actually do that is also a part of the win. And I think that could be a potential game changer in terms of solving the crisis there.
Yes, no, I mean, definitely. It's also just a hassle, right? And so our kind of being involved, holding their hand, coordinating with the inspectors, all of those things add time and can be a challenge for an owner. And, yes, they should do it, but, if we're there to just help them out, it just makes things easier. We had an example where a landlord had agreed to do these repairs, but they wanted the super said, you know what, I'm not going to open up the unit for you. You're going to have a staff person there for 3 days. So we offered the super $25. Yes, he should have done that as part of his job. But for that $25, he did open up the unit. It was a small thing, but because we can be flexible and nimble and just kind of make decisions to really make things happen, it just eases the process.
Yeah, you're speaking gospel there, because I think that's it. Being nimble and being able to do it really can open the door for some potential clients to be able to really have get the housing that they actually deserve. So,
Yes.
From your perspective, do you see things getting better?
I do. I mean, we're very hopeful. I think that New York has so many resources, and I think that we've seen more and more landlords be interested in working with us. It was a challenge at the beginning because they're like, who are you? We don't trust you. We don't know who you are. And now that we have a track record, we're able to bring in, 30 to 40 units a month. So we're getting more and more different kinds of landlords. We have small mom and pop landlords, slightly bigger landlords, different relationships. And I think that they really see the value in kind of continuing to work with us and opening up more doors to people who need housing.
Yeah. Is there a particular time of year that you find to be the most intense for the work that you're doing?
unfortunately, this is an ongoing huge demand every month of the year.
Yeah.
It's
And,
just, you know, people
right.
are at risk of losing their housing or just desperate to get out of shelter. There are just so many people. We had a family who had a voucher in process for a number of months, and it was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and they were about to be kind of put out of their temporary housing situation. And in order to prevent them from being homeless, we were able to use our flexible funding to put them in a hotel for a few days so that they did not have to spend Thanksgiving in the street or in a shelter. And then we were able to actually work with the government to expedite their voucher and move them in that following Monday.
Wow. As you talk with people across the nation, how do you hear New York comparing to what's going on across the nation?
I mean, New York is not unique. Every single state, every jurisdiction has a homelessness crisis. And everywhere you go, there's a problem and a challenge using vouchers. 50% of housing vouchers went unused, the national ones went unused in 2022. That's because landlords find the program difficult. And there are a bunch of initiatives in different states to address this issue. We think the model that we're using, which we replicated from California, is a great one. But there are other interesting initiatives. So I think there's a lot to learn from what other places are doing. And the collaboration that happens among government, nonprofits, landlords, property owners in other places in the country. And we're thrilled that we're kind of being able to take advantage of that here.
Yeah, it's pretty huge. Well, I do want to thank you for taking the time of being with us. Great conversation, Laura Lazarus being with us. And listen, continue the great work. You're making the lives of so many people better, and while also helping out landlords and really solving a much needed problem that we have in our city and in our community. So thank you so much for the work that you do, Laura.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
All righty. Well, we are taking a quick break, but guess what? We do have more here on the Social Justice Forum when we return. We'll be back after this.
Hey, creative family. My name is Timothy Coleman, and I'm the Director of Education here at BronxNet. And I'm standing in BronxNet's Media and Technology Studios in the South Bronx because I want to let you know about an amazing program that we're bringing back that highlights the creativity of community members just like you. Emerging Media Makers is a show that introduces you to BronxNet's certified producers. They've taken a step in their creative journey by enrolling in BronxNet's media training classes. On this show, you'll get to see the many ways that our certified producers have created a space that's all their own. Emerging Media Makers, your passion lives here.
Only 57% of New York City high school students are college ready by their senior year. "55% of high school graduates either have no plans to attend college or are uncertain that they will ever attend." "34% of young adults don't go to college because they can't afford it." Discover what's possible. BronxNet's education programs, internships, and opportunities help engage and inspire Bronx youth and beyond to pursue their passions. Be a part of the BronxNet family. Whether you're interested in our shows, joining a class, or donating to support our mission, visit BronxNet.org to learn more.
What's up, creative family? Discover your voice with BronxNet Community Media classes. Are you ready to bring your ideas to life? At BronxNet, we offer television production classes for community members ages 18 and over, empowering you to share your vision with the world. Get certified in field production, in-studio production, and our new exciting addition, podcast production. Once certified, you can create your own show to air on one of our 6 TV channels. It all starts with our free Unleash Your Ideas Masterclass, designed to help you plan your show idea and set you up for success on your production journey. This class is offered at the beginning of each month for your convenience. Our dedicated BronxNet team is here to support, encourage, and uplift you every step of the way. Join us and become a part of the creative force that engages and inspires the Bronx community and beyond. Sign up today and start your media journey with BronxNet. Visit BronxNet.org/education to learn more and register. Let's create something amazing together.
And welcome back. For decades, the music and art of Violeta Parra have resonated across continents, inspiring generations of artists as well as activists. Parra's work not only fueled child's folk revival, but also became a cornerstone of the Nueva Canción protest music movement. Her life story reflects a powerful journey of artistic reinvention, political defiance, and personal struggle. Joining me now is the director and professor of Latin American Studies at California State University in Los Angeles, Ericka Verba. And thank you so much for joining us, and definitely thinking of you. I know you've got some adverse conditions with wildfires, but thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Well, it is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate it. And, having an opportunity to talk about this wonderful book. And so for somebody who does not know, as you are the author of this book, talk to us a little bit about it.
Well, I'm really excited to be sharing my work with everyone. It's been a long time coming, and it's actually going to be published on January 14th. So I'm very, very excited. And for those of you who don't know Violeta Parra, the first thing I would ask you to do is, Google her, listen to her voice, hear her songs, look at her tapestries, because she's really a multifaceted artist. She did tapestries, she did oil painting, she did ceramics, she did sculpture, and she's completely self-taught. So she's no formal training in anything. She really the highest education she really received was she did 2 years of teacher training, but that was really what sort of women of her time period, it was a safe profession for them to go into. And you started, it was like the equivalent of 2 years of high school. And then she dropped out because she wanted to be a musician. She's from a tiny town in the south of Chile. So pretty interesting trajectory. And just to kind of go back to the art she produced, which I hope you get a chance to listen to and to see. My book is titled after her most famous song, which is called Thanks to Life, Gracias a la Vida. Maybe some of you have heard it. And it alone has been recorded by maybe over 200 artists at this point, including Joan Baez, Omar Portuondo from the Buena Vista Social Club, Isaac Delgado, Placido Domingo, and Yo-Yo Ma did a instrumental version recently when he made a CD sort of music that could soothe us during COVID, during the pandemic, and he included "Gracias a la Vida," an instrumental version. So just that's one of her songs, but her songs really have had an impact on generations of musicians by now. So
Yeah.
that's sort of a short introduction to who she is.
And yeah, and she brings some authenticity, and I say a lot of her authenticity is flowing through this art.
Yeah, well, she was a very stubborn woman. She sort of made a place for herself when no real obvious place was there for her. And she also had tremendous integrity. She was very political. She suffered poverty as a child. Chile, when she was in the 20th century and today, and it should resemble very much the United States, and there were incredible disparities of wealth. We're probably worse at this point, but so it was pretty obvious to her that this was wrong. That a few rich people shouldn't have everything, and everyone else truly struggling to get by. And so her songs are very much a statement of her class alliance, I would say, and her allegiance, and they're very much songs of witness. She described the country that she knew, that she traveled through, because she was also someone who collected folklore. So she traveled the entire length of Chile, and if you ever look at Chile on a map, it's a very, very long country, and so she just and very connected. For that reason, you can basically travel by train the whole country, and that's what she did. And she if I can give an example of one of her songs that I think is very so emblematic, like it represents a lot of her songs. Her protest songs were all in first person. She's always there. She's the witness. And there's one song that she writes about the conditions of the miners in the north of Chile. And so mines are usually located, perhaps always located, in the most barren places you could ever imagine, because that's where the minerals are. So these are mining camps in the Atacama Desert, which is the driest desert on the planet. And she writes songs about the conditions, and the refrain of the song, the phrase that repeats over and over again is "Y arriba quemando el sol," which means "and above this, the sun is beating down on us." And so she describes the conditions that people live in. And what I really love also in terms of her songwriting is she always includes the women. She sees women's labor too. So she talks about the miners, but she also talks about the women in the town, the wives of the miners, who are standing in line at the only water pump in the whole town, right? Because every day to get water for your house, what you have to do is stand in line and fill buckets, right? And that's labor also. She never doesn't see that, which, in the 60s when she was writing this, many people didn't see women's labor, let's face it. And so she's the songwriter that always includes women. And also she always includes herself, so that the last verse of the song talks about coming back to Santiago, which is the capital of Chile, and telling everyone what she just saw, right? That's the purpose of songwriting. That's the
Right.
purpose of her songwriting, is to tell people what she's witnessed in her own country.
And in her own kind of way, I mean, she really brings feminism to another level, right? And what we talk about today, we look at culture. A lot is based on identity, really, who a person is, and being valued for that person, and that value being, that identity being valued. She did that.
Yes, and I want to say it. She did it without ever using or uttering the word feminism. So let's be very clear. It was because it's what she saw. So she's bearing witness, and she sees things probably different than other. I have to say, other songs from that time period, when they talk about workers, los trabajadores, los obreros, right? The workers and their wives, la mujer, right? But she sees what the women are doing also, and I think that makes her stand out. She's the only songwriter at the time that's a woman, right? This is a time period when people are writing protest songs all over the world, in Chile, but it's the same. She's a contemporary of Bob Dylan, who I think people now are talking a lot about, right? So I think it's her perspective, and then I think it's also really. She doesn't just see women as a category. She sees working women. I mean, she's never, it's really, I want to say almost the ideology is like so embedded in her life experience. It's not like, it doesn't need an ism to follow it, right? It's really just she is. Oh, I know what one ethnomusicologist, a Chilean ethnomusicologist, what he described her as, which I really love. He described her as a social geographer, and I think that's a way to. So she's sort of telling the story of the geography of her country, which is really varied, and she's telling it in terms of how the people live.
Do you think that she realized the impact internationally of her work?
Oh, yes, she was absolutely determined. So this is a woman who, was fairly poor in her life. And for those people who in Chile, the middle class and definitely the upper class, it's almost a rite of passage. You have to go to the United States. You have to go to Europe. You have to go study at Berkeley. You have to, that shows that you're someone, right? Because Chile's somewhat isolated. It's in, the far south of Latin America. It's got the Andes on one side, the ocean on the other. So people sort of to become part of the world, they all left, and she didn't have the resources to do any of that, right? But when she's already in her late 30s, she gets invited to these international festivals that actually the Soviet Union is organizing, called the World Festival of Youth and Students. And that's how a lot of poorer musicians and artists from Latin America end up in Europe, right? And she's absolutely determined to share her music and what she knows with the world. That is absolutely one of her goals in life. So she travels. The first time she goes to Warsaw in Poland in 1955, and like most musicians who end up in Europe from Latin America, and they're on the one side of the Iron Curtain, they all end up in Paris. After she finishes playing 2 weeks in the festival, it's not like Poland has work for her. So she ends up in Paris, and she ends up living there for 2 years. And she really, I guess her intent, her I think she sees it as a vocation or a mission, is to show the world what Chile is, who Chileans are. And so that becomes a really important part of her being. And also, strangely, it's where she can be the most successful, because when she's in Chile, she's just a Chilean, right? But when she's in Paris, she's a Chilean musician, and that makes her different. And I have to say, it also makes her sort of exotic. So it's kind of also Parisians' love of anything that's not Parisian, right? This kind of there's a colonial aspect to it, right?
Yeah.
Colonial gaze, I would say. So, but that is the world she lives in, and she has work there, and she doesn't necessarily have as much work in Chile as a folk musician. And in Paris, people want to go and hear the Latin Americans sing, right? They feel like, oh, this is really fun. We should come. It's a pachanga. Let's all go.
It's Paris, and
Yeah, it's Paris too. It's Paris. Who wouldn't want to be in Paris? Come on. It's Paris after World War II. And so one of the musicians describes it. He uses the French term, but there's no translation because it's Paris, right? He talks about the joie de vivre that people are feeling after World War II, because it's actually after World War II and after things are coming back into place, so people aren't quite as hungry and destitute. So it's just he describes this is the same. They're all living in the Latin Quarter. And he describes, going down the street, and there's a cafe, and Jean-Paul Sartre, the most famous existentialist, is sitting there with Simone de Beauvoir, the most famous French feminist, right? And they're having coffee, right? This is where they're living. And it's all happening at once. So he's sipping his coffee next to them. And, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Nobel Prize winner, is writing his novel at that time in Paris. And actually, to make money, he's playing in the same club as Violeta Parra. It's a club called Le Scale, and all of these famous Latin American authors, artists are all playing music to just pay for the rent, which is always the maids' quarter on the 4th floor of these buildings, right? It's this little tiny room, and they're struggling. But the 100 Years of Solitude came out of that, so there you go.
And when we look at Violeta and we think about her legacy, what do you think that people will ultimately, or what is your hope that people will be able to take away through both your writing and both her work?
Yes, well, that's a great question. So let me start with her work, and then I'll talk a little bit about what it's like to write her life, which is a very, that's sort of a different project. But her work, Violeta died before Salvador Allende was elected president, and he was the president before the military coup. He was a doctor. He was the head of the Socialist Party and part of a larger coalition of leftist parties. They were elected. That was called Unidad Popular, the Popular Unity, and it lasted about 3 years. Well, it lasted 3 years, and then there was one of the most vicious military coups that happened in Latin America for that time period. Augusto Pinochet was put into power, General Augusto Pinochet, and he was one of. It lasted 19 years. It was a very long and very violent and repressive dictatorship. Um, and she didn't see all of that, but her songs and her music and her legacy were part of the whole story. So, for example, under Allende, under this progressive government, there was a land takeover of homeless people. They took over land, they built houses, and they called their settlement the Violeta Parra settlement. And after the military coup, they renamed the settlement after some general to show how patriotic they were. And they also outlawed instruments that were associated with folk music and protest music. They literally outlawed the cana, which is a bamboo flute. They outlawed the charango. Well, not literally. They did it sort of. It was an unwritten law, but everyone knew not to play these instruments. They killed musicians. They tortured musicians. Her own son was put in a concentration camp. And then, of course, there was a powerful and brave resistance to military dictatorship. And if I can show you how Violeta Parra sort of became a symbol of that, there's this one moment at the height of the worst violence. It's 1984. And these grassroots organizations that are organizing, they're not the political parties. The political parties have been dismantled. They're illegal. They're the grassroots organizations. They're the people organizing soup kitchens. They're the people organizing that live in settlements. They're the people that are organizing through the church for human rights. And they decide they're going to have a journey, a jornada, a day of unity. And one of the acts of that day of unity, or probably the principal act, is that at noon, everyone will stop what they're doing and go outside and sing this song that gives my book its title, Gracias a la Vida. And you really couldn't arrest someone for singing Gracias a la Vida, because it's this very beautiful philosophical love song that says, thank you to life for giving me my eyes so that I can see, my ears so that I can hear. It's all of the senses. It's my feet so that I can walk the length of my country and see it, and it brings me to your house. And thank you for giving me the materials that make up my song, which are joy and sorrow. And it is also your song and everyone's song. And so you really can't accuse someone of politics for singing a song like that. So, and it made it safe in that sense. And it was also safe because everyone was doing it. But that really gives you a sense of how powerful her songs have been, against, in terms of fighting military dictatorship. And right now at this moment, there's not a student movement, I think, in Latin America that doesn't sing her songs, or a women's movement. She's just become sort of the soundtrack, the accompaniment for movements for social justice in Latin America, I would say.
Yeah, you're plowing in my field right here, because I was getting ready to ask you about, being that we are in 2025 now, and we look at the work that's going on in 2025, social justice, social activism, standing up and making your voice count and be heard. These are things that, Violeta really, she stood for. But when you look at 2025 and you look at where her, her generation, build that bridge for us between then and now.
I think the bridge is the same goals and vision for what we can and should be. I think that, sadly, I teach Latin American history, I teach Latin American studies, and I remember when I first started teaching, which I will admit was decades ago, I would try to explain like the discrepancies. People still talked about the third world and developing nations at the time. And we sort of said, they're the ones where there's really, really rich people right next to really, really poor people. And there was this picture I remember, I think maybe it was Sao Paulo, Brazil. And there was in one of the textbooks, and it would be like a luxury high rise. And right next to it, there were people sleeping on the streets, right? It was a structure where people were clearly homeless. And that was like, I remember when I learned about that, it was like, oh, that's those countries over there. By the time I started teaching in Los Angeles, people were definitely selling oranges on the ramps of highways, which means that you were living on $1 a day. $2 a day. How much were you living on when you're selling oranges on the ramp of a highway? And today, it's exponentially worse. So that there are absolutely, I live in Southern California, and you will see a mansion and you walk 2 blocks from there and there are people sleeping under bridges. There's no we no longer pretend or hide the poverty of our nation. We look at it every day, and I think it's extremely dehumanizing for all of us, because eventually you end up walking past, perhaps in your daily life, there's how do we I, I don't know what the I don't have a good answer to how we are. I know we need to fight for it. We need to fight for social justice. I know that's what your the wonderful station does, and I know that's what Violeta Parra does. And I would say that's the bridge. And I would say what she saw as unjust, and what moved her, and what made her not just what made her shout. Her song says, "I have to shout." She doesn't say I have to sing. She says, "I have to tengo que gritar." Right? I have to shout. What made her want to shout is not that different that what makes us want to shout today, in terms of what's happening in our societies. And I think that all people who that shouting is part of the activism. I mean, clearly this wonderful channel that you've created is shouting, right? And so I think Violeta Parra was shouting in her lifetime, and that we still hear that cry, that grito, and a book is so quiet compared. It's something you sort of open and read probably by yourself, because otherwise someone would bother you. And yet I think sometimes we need that kind of background and that depth as well. We need to sort of hear the human story behind who is shouting, to inspire us, perhaps to make us not feel so alone. And then also, I think when you're sort of confronted with this kind of creative genius that she truly was, I mean, there's also, for me at least, it provoked this incredible curiosity. Like, how does someone uh, get from the south of Chile, a family of 10, um, to write songs that are being sung, half a century after you're dead, by people all over the world. And also her art was shown in the Museum of Decorative Arts in Paris. And she'd been an artist for like 5 years at that point. I mean, she was just so stubborn. She did not know the word impossible. That was just not part of her vocabulary. And the Museum of Decorative Arts, just so you know, it's housed in the Louvre Palace. So it is
Mm.
the Louvre. I mean, in Chile, everyone just said she was in the Louvre, because she was in the Louvre Palace. Her artwork was in the Louvre Palace. So, how does one woman be that kind of songwriter, that composer, and that visual artist too? So that was my curiosity.
Does your book actually, for a reader, do you feel like they feel the shout through your book?
Well, people are contradictory. So she shouted, and she also did some self promotion. I mean, ah, in order to be heard, she sort of had to invent herself as someone that was hearable, if that makes any sense. So there's the gender thing happening there. Her brother is a poet. It's a fantastically creative family. What can I say? So her brother is a poet, and he's considered a modern poet, right? But the option for women to be modern, really, I mean, she was. No one saw her as a modern artist. They saw her as a folk artist, as someone who was naive, someone who was instinctive, which was what women were, right? They were natural and instinctive, and men were inventive and authorial, right? They had the authority to be authors, to invent. And she really was never allowed to be that. She was like, people would describe her work to this day. They'll say, oh, she was like a wildflower that bloomed in a field. Well, that completely takes away any agency she had to create her art, right? What
Mm.
that means that she wasn't intentional. And who says that she wasn't intentional, right? And it's very interesting, because she ends up in the Museum of Decorative Arts in Paris, which is an amazing feat, right? But before that, the person she first approaches is the director of the Museum of Modern Art, because she considered herself a modern artist. But she wasn't allowed to be that. They sent her over to the Museum of Decorative Arts, which is where you have crafts. And so in my book, because we know from her writings that she really admired Picasso, and in one article they're writing about her, she's being interviewed in the 1950s in Chile, and they say, oh yes, she discovered Picasso in Paris. and Picasso is the future of primitivism, right? That's how they describe Picasso. And so Picasso could use all of the same elements and be inspired by quote unquote primitivism. And he was a modern artist. And she could be kind of Picasso-esque, but she had to be folkloric and naive. She was the primitive, if that makes any sense, right? She was never allowed to break through and be a modern artist in her own right. So so in that sense, she I don't want to say she gave up, but she certainly kind of acquiesced to this. She said, fine, you want me to be folkloric? I'll be the most folkloric person you've ever met, right? You know what I mean? She became a campesina, a peasant. She exaggerated certain parts of herself and not others. She created a narrative that I would say both fit and subverted what people were saying about her, or the way they were trying to invent her. So I guess it's a more complicated story than just social activist fights for justice. She also really had to find ways to overcome obstacles to even be heard, right?
And for yourself, obviously, a great deal of time spent on this work. You want readers to be able to get this and put their hands on it. So before we go, please tell people how they can get their hands on this book.
Well, I think the best, well, you can go to Amazon.com, which we have our own, feelings about. So if you don't want to go to Amazon.com, please don't. But the best way to find out more about the book and probably to connect well, it's published by the University of North Carolina Press. But I have a website and I have an unusual name, so it's my name. It's Ericka Verba. They forget the Kim part, but erickaverba.com. So, and if you go there, you can find out a lot more about her, a lot more about the book and why I wrote it, which is, a whole other story, but I don't want to take more of your time. I'm just feel so lucky and privileged to be able to share this wonderful artist with all of you. It really feels great.
It's been great having you. Great literally hearing the story. And for those who aren't so familiar, and I have to admit I wasn't, but, definitely inspired to learn and find out more. So thank you so much for sharing with us, Ericka.
Well, thank you so much. It's been really wonderful. I really appreciate it, Daren. You have a lovely day.
Hey, you have a lovely one, and stay safe. Again, thank you for taking the time. For those who don't know, she's out there in California amidst the fires, and you've taken the time to be with us, and so we appreciate it, and glad to have you.
Well, I appreciate the work that you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Stay safe now. All righty. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Want to let you know we come to the end of our show today. Hope you enjoyed this week's discussion on the Social Justice Forum. If you watch this week's edition, you can catch the recablecast right here on BronxNet.org. If you want to join the conversation, present your point of view, join us on social media at BronxNet TV. Join us next week. We continue to elevate the discussion and bring further awareness across the globe. I'm your host, Daren Jaime, saying take care.